All right, we'll go ahead and get started. We've waited a few minutes and we can still have a opportunity for some other folks to join in. So first off, I want to thank everyone again for showing up to spend an evening with us. Ideally, we would love to be in person, seeing everybody in person in the same room, getting to catch up with folks that maybe we haven't seen in a while. But with all things having to do with COVID, we've had to adjust and adapt. And hopefully this meeting will go off without a hitch for you and you'll get some good information out of it. This is our first time with Cap West running a virtual meeting. So if there's a little bit of a hiccup here and there as we switch from presenter to presenter, please just kind of bear with us on that. A couple of housekeeping items first. If you're in the webinar session, then you notice that you had to register for it. You had to put your name in, email address, and your OHSAA ID. That is how we will take attendance for the session. The Zoom system that we use logs the time that you log on to the webinar and also the time that you log off. So if you want credit for this session, you need to stay until the end of the session in order to get that credit. And once the session is over, Jim Kakos will get a report out of the system, and within a few days or so, he will have the attendance uploaded for the session. A couple of other items that we have on here. We will have live Q&A. So you'll notice that you have controls in your Zoom window for a Q&A and for chat. You can send chat questions back and forth to other participants in the session or to folks that are on the panel. And today the panel is board members. But if you have a question during the presentation, if you could please type that into the Q&A. We have folks that will be monitoring the Q&A throughout the presentations and then prompting the presenters with those questions as they come in, just to make sure that the presenters can continue to flow along with their session and still get your questions answered that are on there. And to begin with, attendees don't have the ability to turn on a microphone or show yourself on video. But if you do need to do that for some reason, if it turns out that a question you've asked is better that we let somebody kind of speak it rather than type it, we have the ability that we can do that, and we can cross that when we get to it. One other item that we have as well is during some of the presentations, you'll see polls that will pop up that ask you for your feedback. Those polls are anonymous, and they're just meant to kind of get a gauge and get some involvement from folks on the session, so we can kind of gauge where people are in terms of answering questions and things like that. They're completely anonymous, and all we're going to do is take a look at those and then share the information back with the group, kind of like doing a show of hands like you would in a regular session. So without any further introduction or anything, I am going to turn this over to Jim Kakos. Jim is going to cover some association business and give some preseason updates from Ohio High School. So Jim, I will stop my video and turn the microphone over to you.
Good evening to everybody. Just got a few topics I want to touch on briefly for the association. First, this is an election year. This year we'll be electing a new president and 2 at-large board members. We will send an email out when we have nominations open for people interested in running for those positions, and we will conduct an election later this year. I want you to mark some important dates down. First, the state rules meeting. It is still up on my OHSAA's website for football 11 up through August 27th without having any additional cost to you to participate and take your state rules meeting. After August 27th, there will be a $50 late fee that will run from August 28th at 12 a.m. and ends on September 29th, 11:59 p.m. If you've also been on the MyOHSAA website, they have been doing local meetings on MyOHSAA. We have had 2 local meetings so far, and today Terry Williams and Dr. Maurer recorded the 3rd meeting, which will go over more in depth of the COVID mechanics that we'll be implementing. So keep your eyes open for an email from OHSAA as to when that meeting will be available on MyOHSAA. Our next online virtual meeting for Capital West will be September 16th at 7:30. And we will also, what we are trying to do is a board from Capital West is conducting one rules type meeting once a month. We are trying to do this on the third Wednesday of each month at 7:30. So keep your eyes open for additional information on that to come. Remember, you still are required to attend 4 local meetings, whether it be through MyOHSAA, or you can attend the 2 meetings that we are doing virtually through Capital West. It is still your responsibility to get those 4 meetings in. And one other follow-up, we are requiring members to pay dues. There will be no late fee this year. And again, all this information I will send out to all the membership in an email. We'll try to have that out to everybody tomorrow. And that's all I have for at this time. And at this point, I will go ahead and mute my mic, and we'll pass it over to Paul, and we'll start our rules interpreter and have our rules changes.
So my part is just to quickly talk about some of the rule changes, and there was 4 that kind of just jumped out at me that I thought we should restate what those are and what kind of impact those could have during a football game. I think one of the first ones is dealing with the 40-second play clock, where a defensive player is either injured or there's some sort of equipment issue where you have to stop the clock and probably send that player off the field for a play. Under those type of conditions, I think last year's those probably would have just been set to 25 seconds. This year, it would be set at 40-second play clock. So basically, we're giving the offense an advantage here. If they want to play quick, they can still play quick, but if they want to go ahead and eat up the clock, they have an extra, 15 seconds to use up. Another one is, I think it's more of a clarification around the 25-second play clock following the legal kick. Whenever there's a new series to either team, the play clock will be set at 25. I think last year, I think the interpretation was it would be set at 40, so they would have 40 seconds to get out there and run the first play. So again, this year, want to be sure it's clarification. It will be set at 25 seconds. Which the next one I think is a good move. It's the disconcerting act foul, which is the new name for the situation where you got defense trying to maybe imitate the snap counts, maybe the play calling that's taken place to try to get the offense to jump. Last year that would have been unsportsmanlike 15-yard penalty. This year it would just be a 5-yard penalty. With the I think the signal for that is with your right hand up behind your head, indicating that it's disconcerting act foul and a 5-yard penalty, and it would be a dead ball situation. Another one I think is probably a good one too is spiking the ball to conserve time. You're able to do that from a shotgun situation now, as long as you have someone in that position that's behind the center, approximately behind the center, in order to receive the snap. It still has to be a good snap, good catch, an immediate spike to the ground. Any sort of bobble, those type of things on the catch, or maybe a bad snap in some way. As long as it still has to be a clean catch. If it's a clean catch, you can go ahead and spike it right away. If it's not, then basically you're going to have a legal forward pass. And that's all I have in regard to the rule changes. There's no questions, and I'll pass it on to Jim to talk about the situation regarding some of the new mechanics and stuff around COVID.
Just bear with me here one moment as I get my presentation up here. All right. This presentation that we're going to do is centered around the modifications for officials, basically for everything that occurred with the COVID situation. And excuse me if I've got something up here. It's blocking my screen. There we go. Face masks and electronic whistles are permissible, but not mandatory. One thing you need to keep in mind is that it's going to be up to the schools and the local health organizations that will dictate if we have to wear a mask or not. So later in the slide, just make sure that when you do check in with the school, that you find out what the local rules are wherever you're at. Communication during the week with the host school is essential. You're going to want to find out if there's officials' locker rooms, what they're going to be like, where you can have a pregame conference and social distance. It's being advised this year that you arrive partially dressed to your game site. One thing, and I sent out 2 additional bulletins just yesterday. They also recommended that just arrive pre-dressed if you can. Umpires are permitted to work the center judge position rather than the middle of the defense. And this was pointed out to me by Dr. Maurer. Keep in mind that umpires working in the middle may be around players that could be asymptomatic, which could put your crew in harm's way. If your umpire should happen to come down with COVID, there's a good possibility that your entire crew could be quarantined for the 2-week period. Umpires are going to be using a 2 beanbag system to spot the ball. 1 beanbag will be used to mark the previous spot, and the second beanbag will be used to mark the succeeding spot. It is suggested to wrap an old beanbag in orange duct tape to make it more visible. I was on Purchase Officials' website. They did have orange beanbags, but they are no longer available. They are sold out. I purchased 2 long pink beanbags, and they're highly visible. So either I'm going to keep those or we're going to wrap them in orange duct tape. The U should also work with the R to help keep the beanbag rotation moving along. Officials will not handle the ball except for measurements. Now, I had a conversation with another secretary today. Keep in mind that could change. It could come to the point where we will not be handling the ball at all. There will be more to come from that from Ohio High School. But as of now, the only time we will handle the ball is during measurements unless it changes. And the offense will be responsible for taking the ball back to the huddle with no exceptions. On a long pass, it's going to be up to that receiver to get the ball and bring it back. The center is going to be responsible for spotting the ball once the offensive team breaks the huddle. Okay, now the question comes up, why shall the ball be spotted after the team breaks the huddle? And 3 points were made. 1, on a windy day, especially on turf fields, we don't want the ball to roll away. 2, the defense can accidentally kick the ball. And 3, it gives the center or another offensive player a chance to clean the ball. Can the center remove his hands from the ball once it is spotted? The answer to that is yes. As soon as he gets up, positions his ball, has it placed, he is allowed to remove his hands. Once he places his hands on the ball, again, to get ready for the snap, and the snap is imminent, he is not allowed to remove his hands from the ball at that time. Again, on long passes, the receivers will be responsible for retrieving the ball. The ball offense can use a ball person to go retrieve the ball. At no time are ball persons allowed on the field. So if it's way thrown over far, they have to go around, get the ball, go back on their sideline. Another question was asked, are ball persons allowed on both sides of the field? And the answer to that is no. Ball persons have to stay on their own sideline. After a score, we're going to instruct the ball persons not to place a ball under the goalpost. It is going to be the kicking team's responsibility.
Hey, Jimmy. Hey, Jimmy.
Yeah.
This is, we got a question you might want to take some time to answer.
Okay.
What about a close spot where we typically move quick to get the ball and put it down for a measurement? Have they given any guidance yet on this?
No guidance on that at all. The understanding is that we are not to touch the ball whatsoever. If we have to get a quick spot, we are get the beanbag down, and the center will have to mark it off the beanbag. We control the tempo. The teams do not control the tempo. Just like in a regular game before all the COVID rules were out. If it was a quick spot, we still had to get the ball placed back out. You still had to communicate with the center to wait, okay, before he was able to get that ball snapped. Does that answer the question?
Oh, there's no additional question as a follow-up at this point, so I believe it has.
Okay, thank you, Gus.
You're welcome.
The kicker will be responsible for retrieving the ball after the kickoff and taking the ball off to the sideline. I want to talk about the team box at this point. Team box will be extended on both sides of the field to the 10-yard lines. And this is for players only. And this is put in to adhere to the social distancing requirements that we're under with COVID. Now note, the coaching box, team personnel, still must be between the 25-yard lines. Again, with charged timeouts and authorized conferences, a single charged timeout may be extended, and again, may be extended to a maximum of 2 minutes in length. Okay, this is to give teams ample time to hydrate. Remember, teams are not sharing water bottles. They are to use their own individual water bottle. And that also goes for officials. Make sure you have your own water with you at the game. Authorized conferences for charged timeouts should take place at the bottom of the numbers, and players are required to social distance during the timeouts. Intermission may be extended to a maximum of 2 minutes between the first and second and the third and fourth periods, and following a try, successful field goal, safety, and prior to the succeeding free kick after a touchdown. Okay? And each game official and players should have their own beverage container brought out to them on the field. Pre-game conference, coin toss, and overtime procedures. For the coin toss, it's going to be limited attendees to the referee, umpire, and one designated representative from each team. The coin toss will take place in the center of the field with the designated individuals maintaining social distancing of 6 feet. And there will be no handshaking prior to and following the coin toss. You want to maintain social distancing while performing the pregame meeting between officials and coaches. And for overtime procedures, we're going to follow the same procedures used at the start of the contest for coin toss. A couple points of emphasis that Bruce wanted me to bring up. Remember, targeting.
Jimmy?
Yes, sir.
Before you do that, we had a statement more than a question. And I was trying to get some clarification on part of the question, or the statement rather, but I'll just read it out loud. Dr. Maurer was at an inter-squad scrimmage that a person worked on Friday. And Bruce was asked a question about the wings getting the ball and spotting it on a close third or fourth down. Apparently the response from Bruce was the wings would this says bet, B-E-T, but I believe it get, the wings would get the ball and spotting it. I'm still trying to get clarification on the last sentence there, but I believe it's supposed to read on Friday. The answer was that the wings would get the ball and spotting it. So if this person wants to rephrase their statement or question, we'll do a better job of trying to get an answer. But does anyone else have an idea of what he's talking about here on third and fourth down when it's close, what the wings should do?
I'll try to get some further clarification, but as of now, from what I was told, we may treat it as right now as a measurement, but again, I'll need to get some further clarification on that.
Yeah, there's also another statement where this says that the teams can bring out 4 captains and 3 can drop back to the hash during the coin toss.
According to the mandate that I've seen, it was only 1 captain from each team in the middle of the field. Again, I'll try to get some clarification on that.
Okay, this person did basically came back and said the answer from Bruce was yes, the wings would get the ball and spot it as usual.
Well, okay, then that's what we'll go with. But I also do know that they are, to keep in mind that a lot of this procedures, it's new to everybody. And keep in mind, it's evolving as we're going, guys. So,
There's another good question. As we all know, one of the pregame responsibilities is checking the balls. Since we're not supposed to touch the balls, is that still going to be an umpire responsibility during pregame?
Yes, it is, and it is actually addressed in bulletin number 2 that I sent out yesterday. We are still to check the footballs, and it is highly recommended to use hand sanitizer following checking of the balls, just to make sure your hands are sanitized and clean.
And the other individual is restating that 1 can go out and 3 can stop or drop it back to the hash for the toss. So you'll get clarification
We'll need to get clarification on that.
I believe that's all I have right now. Question-wise.
All right. Thanks, Gus. All right. Points of emphasis. Remember, targeting and personal fouls do not constitute an automatic ejection. If you eject for targeting or personal foul, it must be egregious. OHSAA is going to have the final say if the player is going to be suspended for an additional game. So basically, if you think that foul is so bad and you eject that player will be done for the remainder of the game that night. But Ohio High School will be reviewing the film, and they will have the ultimate decision if an additional game suspension is warranted. And one other point that was brought up is if you have an all-out fight, before it was an automatic ejection plus 1 game, that has been changed. If there is an all-out fight, it is now an automatic ejection plus 2 games. All right, so keep that in mind also. Excuse me?
On the checking of the ball. The question is, who's ever going to bring the balls to the officials, are they required to stay close by while the balls are being checked for pressure, or will the officials take the ball bag to the teams prior to kickoff for warm-up purposes or whatever?
I think we need to err on the side of safety. Most of the times in previous years, they usually just dropped the balls off, and we just took them out and gave them to the teams. You know, if the ball person decides to stay while you check the balls, make sure we're following social distancing and proper protocol for social distancing.
Okay, that's it. Well, here's another one. Pre-game. Who was in the meeting with the head coach?
We can have the entire crew with the meeting with the head coach, but we do have to maintain social distancing protocol.
You're good to go right now.
All right, guys, thank you very much. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Scott Wilson.
All right. So before all the COVID madness had struck, the board got together when we were planning out how we wanted to put together our local association meetings for this year. And we wanted to set it up in a way so that the content built on the previous meetings. So what you see in the first one would be the basis for the second one, and then the first two would be the basis for the third, and so on. So we kind of build all throughout the presentation from one meeting to the next. So the first one that we wanted to put together was on judgment and decision making in the game. So it's about those things that you do on the field that they're related to the rules, but it's more about how you reach the conclusions and the things that typically will go into those conclusions. So the first thing I want to do is I want to show a couple of video clips here. So, and Gus, I'm going to need your help in 1 second. But what I am going to do, let's see here if I can get this video clip up. So Gus, if you want to launch the poll number 1, and folks, please do not answer the poll until you've seen the video clip. So I want to set this video clip up first here. Well, wait a minute, provided I can get out of this and get to my video clip. Okay. So in this first video clip, make sure I get the right one. Here's the setup for this one. This is early in the game. I believe this is in the first quarter, and there really hasn't been anything negative going on in the game so far. So I want you to watch this video clip, and then after you answer this, or after you see this clip, then I want you to weigh in on the answers over there on the left. So hang on a second here. Let me get this a little bigger on the screen for you. And we'll just play it here. And I'll play that back again here. So keep your eye on right here. This number 3 on the left-hand side of the screen, keep an eye on what he does, in particular what he does after the play. And then think of this in terms of how I set this play up, that it's early in the game, you know, kind of ignore that guy tripping over the goal line there. This is early in the game, not a lot of negative stuff going on, so just kind of take a look at the end of this play here, keeping an eye on number 3 there. All right, so go ahead and answer that, that question there, what you think. Let me get this off my screen there. And after we give everybody a moment or two here to do that, Gus, on your screen, you should have some results that should have shown up there and an option to stop the poll and share the results. So if you would share the results of that. There you go. So based on his actions after that play and the way we set this up, looks like the majority of people say, yeah, this is just a talking to, but there's still a fair number of people, 27% of folks say that, you know, this is probably something I would get in for taunting. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and close this, and we'll get out of this video here. And Gus, if you would launch poll number 2, similar poll. You got poll number 2 there, Gus? There we go. Okay. So now I'm going to play, hold on a second here. So now you'll notice this is the same clip, but the situation is different here. This particular player actually had been flagged for a blindside block earlier in the game. He had been flagged for taunting another player after a tackle, and his behavior really has not responded to much that the officials have done. So I'm going to play this particular clip, and you can see this, and then I want you to answer this question again. But again, keeping in mind the setup that I just gave for this play. All right. So I'm not going to play that a 4th time for you, but to go ahead and answer this question again in reference to the way that I set this one up this time. Give everybody a moment or two to chime in on it. But what I had said, that apparently I still have myself muted there. But what I was mentioning was just to look at the difference between the answers just based on the arrangements, the setup that I gave on exactly the same play. In one instance, almost everybody says that it's an unsportsmanlike foul or an ejection. In the previous instance, it was a talking to for the exact same behavior, but the setup is a little different. So my apologies for being on mute there. I mentioned we would have a few hiccups, and it was me that had that one. Were there other questions aside from that HBAC question?
That's all that's come in so far.
Okay. Go ahead and close this one and launch poll number 3, if you would, please. All right, there we go. So you're looking at number 2, black here. And in this particular situation, again, in this particular situation, this is a blowout score or a blowout game. The offense, you'll see black is on defense, or black is on offense. The defensive team is way ahead in this game. It is a complete blowout at this point. So let's look at this video clip here. Actually, my apologies. It is the white team that is I said defense. The white team is way ahead in the score at this point. So pay attention to black in this situation here. All right, ignore the potential hurdle there. And I'm going to go back and play this clip back close to, maybe I will if I can get it to go. Okay. Right there. That's the action we were watching, was that number 3 that came in there. I had a little trouble getting my video to stop. So based on the setup there, it's a blowout game. Go ahead and answer this question. And Gus, if you want to close that question and bring up the results for it. All right, so do nothing, a couple, a good talking to by most folks, and penalized for a block in the back on some as well. All right, let's change things up a little bit and go ahead and launch poll number 4, the final poll, and we'll watch this video clip again. Hopefully I can get it to do what I want this time. All right, so the setup on this one, in this situation, ignore the stakes over there, and we're going to say that in this particular play, it is 4th and 1. Black is ahead by 4 points. You've got 30 seconds to go in the game, and we'll let the play run from there. All right, based on that, what is your response here? All right, Gustin, you can go ahead and close that out and pop up the results there, and I will get back to presentation. So in this particular situation, almost everybody's going to penalize that exact same action as a block in the back. So hang on to the thought there that there's a difference, exact same action, but the situation, you did something different. Hang on to that for a second. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint, hopefully. Jump back into it here. Okay, so those were the plays that we had there. So what I want to talk about here, kind of, we'll get to those clips in a second, but kind of getting into the beginning of this, subconsciously, things happen that influence all the decisions you make, not just on the football field, but everywhere. So I really like this first quote. There's no such thing as an immaculate perception. What you see depends on what you thought before you looked. So all of the things that cross your field of vision, your brain is processing that and making sense out of that based on what it expected to see. So we'll get into a little bit more detail on how that happens here in a second. And the next one about no such thing as a context-free decision-making, that's kind of what we just demonstrated with those 2 video clips. Exact same play in both instances, but overall, the group's choice on what they were going to do was different based on the context of what was going on. So you hear an awful lot from people that say you should officiate the game exactly the same in minute 1 as you would in minute 8 or 9 or 10 of a quarter, or the first quarter in the fourth quarter. It's all well and good to have that goal, but the bottom line is that's not how our brains are wired. Our brains are wired to see things in a particular context and to make the judgments and the decisions based on what we're seeing in the world at that time. So what those are called is subconscious biases. A lot of times we hear the word bias and everybody kind of puts a negative connotation on it. But if you take the word bias out of the situation that it's in, all the word bias really means is that you have a predisposed leaning towards a particular choice, whatever that happens to be. And that's it. That's influenced by a lot of things. There's a really good book that I've read in the past, and I've got the details on the book a little bit later if anybody's interested. It's called Scorecasting, and it is basically about the science behind decision-making and biases in sports, everything from player choices to coaching choices. There are large sections in there on officiating choices. And what the researchers for this book showed is that there definitely is bias in sports when it comes to officials. But it's not a conscious bias. It's not something where the overall group is saying, hey, let's go out there and make sure the home team wins, or let's not call holding in the third quarter of a tight game. It is something that happens by situational means and based on other biases that come up in your memory. So there's several different types of biases. The 5 that I'm going to talk about today are the ones that are most relative to what we do in officiating. There are literally hundreds of different types of biases that are out there. And I certainly don't mean to imply by any fact that these are the 5 most important overall, but these are the ones that really influence what we do on the football field. So the first one, a historical bias. This is where somebody has a predetermined or a subconscious thought of where they're going to go in a certain situation based on their past experiences and trends that they've seen over time. So this would be something like if you have had a particular team over the years and you know that the way this team plays is mean and nasty and it's going to be a rough game and you're going to have a lot of personal fouls and cheap shots and things like that. When you go into that session, if you are someone who is wired for a historical bias, that's going to influence what you see in a game. You're going to see somebody's hit and think, I know exactly what this is. I've seen this a dozen times before, and you're going to be more likely to flag something based on that historic bias. There's also a recency bias for folks that are more wired to look at things that happen right now, recent past. So that could be something like those plays that we just showed in the first clip. When I talked about, hey, this is this guy's first offense, he really hasn't done much of anything. Almost everybody said they would give this kid a talking to. But now with some recency bias in there that he's behaved this way several times throughout the game, towards the next clip when he did the same thing, everybody looked at it and said, hey, you know what? I've seen this recently. I know what it's about. I'm going to flag him for that. A context bias. And the context bias is what we demonstrated with the second video clip. It is all about what the exact setting is. It's not who's doing what, but what it means to the physical setting. And you could get a context bias from the weather. You could get it from down and distance. You could get it from whether or not you're feeling bad or you're tired on the field, a whole bunch of different things. And in this case, the context bias was provided by the fact that for some reason, that particular foul seemed more important because it was 4th and 1 and towards the end of the game than it was when it was a blowout situation and it really didn't matter to the score. So the context made a difference in that setting as well. The next one is an omission bias. This is something where you react more strongly to negative actions rather than to non-actions. This is kind of something that as officials, we experience this bias an awful lot from coaches and from players. If you think back through your officiating career in whatever sport it is, there's bound to have been a time where you've made a call and you think, yeah, you know what, I probably shouldn't have called that, whether it was tossing a kid out of a game for something that you had second thoughts about later, or calling a hold that after you called it, you're not quite sure you saw it. But you know when those things happen and it's obvious to the crowd and it's obvious to the players and the coaches, they get really upset about that, and you are going to hear something really, really strong from them because you took an action that resulted in something negative for them. Now, if you kind of spin that on its head, what omission bias says is that if there is something that happens in front of me, maybe it's a hold that I don't call, they're probably going to get upset about it, but probably not as upset or as long-lasting as if I had actually done something that was negative rather than not done something that was detrimental as well. And the last on this list is a social bias influence. This comes from your social partners, and those could be the crowds, coaches, crewmates, players, anybody on the field. This is really that peer pressure influence stuff where I think we all like to think that we're strong in our positions on things and we're not influenced by somebody arguing with us. But the bottom line is there is a lot of science behind a social bias where if somebody says something enough or does something enough or gets a big enough crowd, they can influence what it is you do. It may not always be to their liking, but they have the ability with their social pressure to influence how you make decisions and what your judgment is. So why are we talking about biases? In everything you do, your biases inform your worldview. That's how you look at everything. Your biases are developed from every experience and every interaction you've had from the time you were born until today, even including the stuff that we're talking about right now. It all gets in and it forms the way we look at and interpret the world around us, including what's on the field. So if you hear somebody that they say maybe at their coaches meeting, hey, you know, I've got a pet peeve about A, B, or C. They wouldn't bring that up if there wasn't something in their past that informed them in their decision making that this is something I don't like. So your worldview and your biases drive your judgment and decision making. And it's not so important to know what those biases are, to know that they are there so you can change them. It's important to know that those biases exist and they influence what you do so you can use that to your advantage. So if you know your own biases, then you're better able, I think anyway, you're better able to assess situations and make decisions on the fly because you have an idea of all the different pieces and parts that might play into that. But the real critical part is to know that everybody else out there has their own separate biases as well, and they are going to be completely different from yours, which is, I think that's one of the great things about having a crew of 4 or 5 people, depending on what level you're working at, and potentially 6 or 7, is I know with the folks that are on my crew, when we have a flag that's down, somebody else is going to come in if they have a different bias on that play, and they're going to say, hey, Scott, I didn't quite see it that way. And we can have that conversation and that interaction because I know that they have their own particular points of view and they're influenced by what they've experienced. I can learn from that. And maybe my call wasn't quite right. But by getting together and sharing that information with each other, we can come to what is probably a more well-rounded decision. And by the way, that is one form of that social bias influence. When I have that group of 4 other really close guys with me that I trust and I know when I get together with them that we're going to get a better decision, that's a social bias right there. Okay, so that all kind of ties together into something that I call the officiating bias directive. And this is taking into account your worldview and all the biases that you've seen and putting that into action on the field. We've gotten some directives from Ohio High School and from National Federation on certain things that we should be biased to call or not call. So the officiating bias directive tells us that we should favor calling actions that impact the game. Whether it's one of the 3 big things, sportsmanship, gives an advantage or a disadvantage, or impacts player safety. So if there's something that happens out there and it hits one of those 3 things, we should call it. Some of the things like the advantage, disadvantage, when we looked at the block in the back in a certain situation, that didn't really give an advantage to anybody because the game was so far out of hand. So it's okay not to call that and to give a talking to. Where the different situation where it's 4th and 1, that really had a bearing on the advantage, disadvantage to one team or the other. So it's still okay to call that. That's one of those things where it might be okay to not call something early in the game that you would later in the game. The key on that is not to ignore it, not to do the omission bias where you just say, hey, I'm just going to forget about it altogether, but to do that talking to. If you see an action that could at some point impact safety, advantage, or sportsmanship, talk to the players, tell them what it is before it gets to the point where it's something that you should call. The next line down, red rules. I work in healthcare, and I know many other industries also have something called red rules. But what a red rule is basically a line you don't cross because it's something that really breaks down what you're trying to do as an organization. And in healthcare, we have red rules because if we don't follow certain rules, we could endanger people's lives. So they are there. Everybody knows them. And when one of those red rules is approached, something is done about it, whether it is, in the sports world, calling a foul on somebody, or in my healthcare world, whether it's saying, stop, we're going to have a timeout, we're going to talk about this before we get going again. So it's important to know on the field what your red rules are. When you look at the sportsmanship, the advantage, the player safety, where do you draw the line? That's a bias you can determine before you go out on the field. So if you have something like foul language, I know there's a lot of folks that say, I will put up with a player dropping the F-bomb if it's quiet and I'm the only one that can hear it. I might just say something to him. But if he says it loud enough for people to hear on the sidelines, then I'm going to throw a flag on it. That's an example of a red rule. You know where your line is. You know when somebody steps over that line, you have to do something about it, and you have to do it every time. It's important to know those because those kind of go in with your biases as well to figure out how you're going to do the plays. The next important one down there is the if and doubts. So we've got the three big things that we need to follow. You need to know where your rules are on those, but the if and doubts also. There are lots of plays in football that are very subjective. And if you aren't exactly sure what you should call, there's an if and doubt for it. So you should know those if and doubts that are put out in the Gold Book. And if you're in one of those situations and you're not quite sure what you should call, go by that if and doubt directive that is in the book. That's a bias directive that says, for example, if you're looking at an incomplete pass or a fumble, it's an incomplete pass. They want you to be biased in that direction on that particular type of play. And they've got a whole bunch of those in there that are very helpful on the field. So decision and judgment making strategies, excuse me. How do you take all those biases and use them to your favor? Well, some strategies you can use. The first one is don't insert yourself into or disrupt the game rhythm if it's not necessary. So if you look at the sportsmanship advantage and player safety, you need to get those things. All the other stuff that's out there, if you become the center of attention on the game and it's not one of those sportsmanship advantage or player safety things, then you've kind of crossed into this realm where you're really disrupting the game in a way that's not necessary. If that starts to happen, step back, take a look at the biases that you have and figure out what's driving you to do that, and maybe see if there's some other way to handle something. The next one, when you think you saw it, you didn't. Dr. Maurer will say all the time, let your mind digest what your eyes have seen, not let your mind tell your eyes what it saw. So if you think you saw something, you probably didn't. If you need your mind to convince your eyes of what you think is out there, it probably didn't happen. But if you can see something and then your brain takes a few seconds to process it, so if it's working the other way around, that's the way you want to work. But don't call something if you're not sure it's there. Go to one of those if and doubts or just let it go. And by the way, that's where the omission bias can really kind of help you out. If you think you saw something, but you're not sure, don't flag it, because if you do catch hell from somebody, it's going to be lighter than if you called it and it wasn't there. The next one, I have this in quotes, the let the players help you make the call. This is in quotes because I certainly do not mean let a yelling, screaming player doing this in your face get you to throw a flag on something. What it means is pay attention to the reactions of the players. And you will be able to tell whether or not you are processing what you saw in a way that is most likely right. And this is another one, if you look at the blocks in the back, Dr. Maurer will talk about that a lot. Look at how the player falls. If the player falls on his back, chances are that block was not from behind. If he falls on his front, chances are the block was from behind. So if you watch what happens as a result of the play, the physical reaction when they fall, the look on their face, anything like that, those players can help you make the call, even though they're not really trying to do that, just by paying attention to that. And keep the game moving. If you've made a call, don't dwell on what happened. So you make a call, coach gets upset about it, get back to the game. We're all going to make mistakes. We just need to do what we're going to do it to the best of our ability, and keep the game moving on. When you stop the game repeatedly for little things that don't matter, or to argue with a coach about whether you made the right call or not, that's where you get up into that top one and you're starting to insert yourself into the game in a way that's not really necessary. A couple other tips on judgment making or decision making and judgment. Give a little bit longer leash to those in charge. So the head coach, as long as he's not crossing one of the red rule lines, let him ask a few more questions. Let him make a few more statements. He's in charge. If you listen to some of that stuff, chances are you're going to be able to develop a little bit better relationship, and he's going to give you a little bit more of a benefit of the doubt somewhere down the road in that game when the situation might warrant. And keeping in mind that you do have your red rules, your red lines, don't let them cross them. Give the benefit of the doubt to those who have earned the respect. If you had a player early in the game that you had a talking to, and it was a very effective talking to, maybe he did something that you thought was unsportsmanlike, and he said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Later on in the game, something might happen with a similar situation. you can give that person potentially a little more benefit of the doubt that they didn't mean anything wrong based on what they did earlier. That's a little bit of the recency bias that's going on there. Then this next one is a when in doubt, not an if in doubt, but a when in doubt. So when in doubt, do what is expected. So this is some of the social bias. You know that with all the different officials that you've worked with, that there is generally a common way that certain things get handled. I think it's not 100% that people do anything the same way, but there's kind of a high and a low bound, and people tend to bounce back and forth inside there. One of those things might be how you call motion on a lineman. Let's say if you're working a lower level game, maybe it's a middle school or a little league game, the kids are wearing a helmet that weighs almost as much as they do. Most folks working those games are not going to call a foul for a kid bobbling around with a heavy helmet on when he's 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. So if you're out there and you're seeing that kind of thing, if you're in doubt about whether or not you should call that, do what you would expect you would see other folks do, and then you can go talk with your crew after and say, hey, should I have done something different? This gives you a little bit of that social bias protection, that if you're doing what coaches, fans, and players have seen other officials do, they're more often going to expect, or more often going to think, that what you did is sound judgment and sound decision making because you did what they expected other people to do. And tie your work back to the officiating bias directive. So all the things that you're doing, tie it back to the safety, the advantage, disadvantage, and the sportsmanship. Tie it back to the if in doubts. If you do those things, it's very difficult to go wrong if you're following all those directives there. Because after all, this is the basis that all of your work is built on, is following those directives, staying within the norms, and making sure that you're working for the betterment of everybody that's out there on the field. So this is the last slide I've got here. I told you I would come back to this book, Scorecasting. This is an excellent book. It's a fun book if you like sports and you like statistics. They go into a whole bunch of different things on a whole bunch of different sports. It can be kind of a heavy read, but I really like it. You can pick it up at Amazon for, I think it's $7 or $8 at the moment. So that's all I have for this particular presentation. Gus, were there any comments or questions that popped up during that?
You did. No questions came in.
Okay. So I will hand the ball back over to Mr. Kakos there for a moment for any kind of closing comments that you've got about attendance or anything like that. So Jimmy, I will turn it over to you.
Hey guys, just keep in mind I will be getting a report that shows me who was in attendance and the duration that they were with the meeting. I had a chance to go through the attendees. A couple names popped out that I have no idea who you are. One was logged in as a Galaxy Tab A and just a straight Jim. If you'd like, send me an email with your name and your OHSAA number so I know who you were, so I can make sure you get credit. My email address is jkakos7474@aol.com. Again, if you don't see your attendance in a couple of days, I'll try to get them on tonight. Feel free to send me an email with your information, and I'll make sure that you get your meeting attendance.
Hey, Jimmy.
Yes.
Galaxy Tab A is Joe Sergio.
Gotcha.
Jim Joy number is 203235.
Okay. I got that, and I think that's everybody.
All right. I did see one question that came in here that didn't make its way to me. And the question was, are safety fouls the exception to our unconscious choices? I don't really think they're an exception. I think they are something that we get a lot more training on, so it's more of an informed choice, but it's still one of those things that I know I've been in games where I've had debates with folks that I've worked with as to whether or not something was or was not a particular safety foul. But I think the margin for error on those, or the variance and the bias, is probably a lot smaller since we get so much education on that.
There is another generic question. I think I know the answer, but I'll let the experts answer. And the question is, are officials supposed to get COVID testing before starting the season?
My understanding, that is a no. And I believe that's going to be in the governor's order that he'll be issuing later this week.
Okay. The gentleman says thank you.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for attending. Hopefully this went well and was beneficial for you. We will have the next session posted up on the Cap West website before long. And I want to reiterate that these sessions are not just for Capital West members. So anybody that needs a local meeting credit or just wants to listen in and join in on the meeting is welcome to. And they can do that from coming to the Cap West website and registering. We do take the attendance off that registration, so please make sure that when you get on there, give the real information so Jimmy can make sure that everybody gets the credit they deserve on it. So thanks everyone. Have a good evening. And if we don't talk to you again before the season starts, have a good season and stay safe.